approaching and organizing a trial, how can coaches very commonly stay away from the best three kids at trial and shift their focus on trying to decide between the 20th and the 21st plays in their representative squad, assuming that they had two teams?
Yeah. So you want me to go?
Yes, please, Reece.
Yeah. I think for me, just remembering as a coach, it is a trial, it's a tryout. You know, it's not team practice. You're not already got your team picked and you're rolling it out. Like for me, generally speaking, in any trial I've been involved in or any selection, the first 6 or 7 pretty much pick themselves. Like any coach that came in out of this room, Zoom, whatever it is, would probably Zoom room. They'd probably pick the same 6 or 7 kids, and then a lot of the details in those next 3. And then as you go to the next team and the next team, depending on how many divisions or association or teams you're picking have, that's when the selections become harder because the gap between those kids is less. So then it's trying to find out, well, what's their point of difference or what do we need? So for me, first thing is remember it is a tryout. It's not a team practice. Those first few will pick themselves. You don't need to spend time worrying about them. Some strategies I think help with that too for you to focus on selection is have someone else run the session. So don't you be running everything. I think if you have someone else run the session, like coaches you trust, like I know when I ran the Vic team state tryouts, basically I never ran a drill in the first 2 tryouts. I had all my other coaches that I knew come in and run everything, and myself and our assistant coaches just focused on selection. Maybe I'd put in the 5-on-0 offense, or obviously address the group at the start and the end if there's a point I wanted. But other than that, we just focused on selection and really, nutting down on that. So I think that you can do some things that can help you with that, and then really hold yourself to account in taking notes on players and identifying every player at the tryout. Again, it all depends on context. If there's 20 kids, when I coached at Mallon, 10 years ago, there was 20 kids at tryouts. It's a lot easier to identify the kids, generally already knew the kids. When I coached for the state teams and for at Wyndham with the Basketball Association, there's 130 kids at tryouts. It's a lot different. So that context will determine it a little bit, but I think you've got to identify every kid, make some notes on every kid so that if someone does request feedback, you can give it. And I think that if you invest in those things, that can help you avoid just coaching the 3, because you've obviously already identified it if you've thought you're doing that. So put some strategies in place where you remember it's not a team session yet. Let's make sure we pick the best players to go with those better players. That would be some advice from me. Tim, I don't know if you got anything to add on the back of that.
Yeah, I think they're excellent points. I would say put other players around those players, split them up, make sure that, you put the players in different situations. One of the things that you want to know with some of your other players who, for whatever reason, are either less skilled, less athletic, less experienced or whatever, you want to find out what they're good at and whether or not, like you say, Reece, how they fit.
Yeah.
What's their unique skill? Are they good rebounder? Are they good talker? Are they just really poised? Are they, they've got a good temperament? They're a good competitor. And then see if they blossom with those other kids, and put the 3 best with these other 2, and then see if they can actually play together. See if they complement them in some ways. I mean, keep experimenting, keep thinking, and that's you thinking about what makes a good team. I think, the obviously thing is, if we're going to build the best car, we just don't go and buy the best part of, BMW got the best suspension, Volvo have got the best safety, they've got that. It doesn't really work like that, because those things, you can't put that together because they don't fit.
Yeah.
So how do we get things to fit? And so what we're looking is for those other kids, their qualities, their emotional state, their psychology, their skill, their athleticism, what complements our players. So the more you move the kids around and ask them to do different things, put them in a trap, put them in a zone, do different, try different things like the game works, then something might, you might realize something, that you didn't even imagine that could happen. You go, oh, and that's really pleasant when that happens. And then the coaches look at each other and like, ooh, I like that.
Yeah. No,
That's cool when that happens.
I agree, and I think you can see different things there. But the main thing I want from my 3 best players at a tryout is for them not to get injured. So have no one wipe them out. So that's the main thing I want.
That's right.
No, thank you. Question number 3, Tim. I'll start this with you. In priority, what traits in a player stand out for longer-term success at a representative trial?
What trait say that again, please, Jared. What traits
and characteristics in a player stand out for longer-term success at a representative trial?
Good question. I think, and immediately different players that I've worked with over the years, and you see those players kind of blossom. It's interesting that one of the first things that comes to my mind is players who aren't nervous. Generally, I reckon you don't, like, there's got to be something where they're not apparently nervous, about things. There's something about them that they're really comfortable in their own skin. I think that's one of the key things that what I would say is a factor, because there's a couple of players that really spring to mind. So one of the players is like Chris Goulding. Chris Goulding came with the Emus team, and he wasn't at the AIS, and he came in for a trial. Bruce asked him to come down, and I remember going picking Chris up at the airport and bringing him out to camp, and he chewing gum, and he was relaxed. And the moment he got in there, he was just really comfortable. You know what I mean? And whether you want to call it swagger, arrogance, I don't know. Chris wasn't arrogant. He was just comfortable in his own skin with who he was. And I reckon that was always a good thing. And if I think about a lot of those other players, they're pretty confident. They're not really nervous. And I don't really want to go into big games with nervous players. You
won't win.
No, so that would be the obvious thing for me. Do they compete? Do they have something in them that says they want to compete? Do they like playing basketball? Are they into it? Do you have to, encourage them just to play hard to compete? That's not usually a good sign. Competing, a sense of unity. Do they just hate everyone? I think they some of those obvious things, but there are a couple of things to me that stand out, obviously, to start with.
Tim, how do you find out those things in a short trial period? Some people might have 2-3 tryout sessions. How do you find out those they're kind of intrinsic type things? They're not overt necessarily all the time. They've got things you've got to really have an eye for and pick up and spend time with people. How do you suggest the coaches go about that?
Yeah, I think one of the, obviously in the drills, but the drills are part of it. Watch the drills, watch carefully, watch between drills, watch when the ball goes out of bounds, watch them at the drink station, watch them slightly before training, between. It's in those moments of in between where lots of stuff is revealed. When do they, there's characteristics like, helping someone else up, giving someone else a drink bottle, getting after the ball that went out of bounds, even though they weren't going to get it, they went and, chased after it. It's the game, watching closely the game for some of those sorts of things, and how they are with the others, the chemistry, the interaction with those other players. So you just got to be attentive. And how do you be attentive? Well, don't be off, go and have a chat to the coaches, but go out, walk around, don't just stay at the score bench, get out onto the floor, get in amongst the drills, walk in between the lines on the baseline. You know what I mean? Like some coaches just standing back too much and,
100%.
oh, there they are over there. You like move around within them, sit with them in the lunch break a bit here and there, find out what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where you find out those points of difference that those kids will bring, that'll separate them. I think the one big thing for junior coaches to be a little bit more straightforward and plain and vanilla, which is probably a good way to describe me compared to Tim. My hair's a lot more, what do you call it, real estate style instead of the wild man. But I think the physical attributes are sometimes underlooked. Like I think at a young age group, particularly I think about my experiences with rep teams and being a DOC for a large association, people are very reluctant to take some big kids at a younger age because they're not quite as good as these other guards. But if you pick 10 guards in under 12s, under 14s, because they're slightly more skilled at that age, whatever, that's something that's going to hurt you down the track because your association is going to have no bigs. And when anyone that's coached 16s or 18s or older is always going, well, where are all the bigs? Well, we never picked them because they weren't as good as the little kid that runs around and plays 5 other sports and plays soccer and does all this. So I think take a risk on some bigger kids or some athletes. Timmy, you always used to talk about if they got tall parents or tall mums, it's a good way to talent ID. But I definitely think that's one thing because to be a good basketball player, you need some physical attributes. So there's some exceptions to that rule, but generally 6 foot plus is a minimum in the men's game. Or at least around that sort of mark to play, and some other attributes to go with that. So if we don't pick some size, we're going to hurt ourselves. And I think that's often the case when we get to selections. We're always thinking, well, where are the bigs? Where's the size? And it's just we haven't picked it. But there's some kids around. Just got to make sure we push them along and develop them.
Bandy-legged players. I mean, I remember I had this discussion with Marty Clark, talent ID, and I'm not sure what the other coaches. I see Al McGautry's there, and I know that Al's probably seen plenty of players. One of the interesting things is the idea of like toes in, and not necessarily standing with your feet splayed. So bandy-legged players, I'm not sure if everyone can think of any great bandy-legged or slightly bow-legged athletes. Ryan Brockhoff. I'm not sure if you remember. Al knows Ryan. Really bandy kind of player, and that was something that comes to my mind, like watching some bandy-legged, their toes turned in slightly because you can push off, and not necessarily go out. It's very difficult for someone who just stands naturally out to slide and move. So that was a little tip that Marty and I used to talk about a lot when observing players. Someone who looked like they just got off a horse.
That's funny. I think the last...
Not a jockey.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say, it kind of goes against my last point, but I get what you're saying. The last point I would say with the competitors, how do you assess that? Like, whose team win games in the sessions? Like some players are just winners and find a way, and their team will just win every scrimmage, everything. And we look at this other kid that's, you think they've got the attributes, whatever, their team's always losing. Like, there's probably a reason they don't do the things that win. And often they're not always the prettiest stuff. They're boxing out, they're diving on loose balls, getting down and guarding, scrapping after things, fighting through screens. So sometimes, trying to identify, well, who wins, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. And certainly take talented kids and take kids with potential, but it can be a word that sometimes we hold on for too long. I mean, there's some players that are in the NBL and they're 31 and we're still saying they got potential. Well, if they haven't lived up to their potential by then, it's probably you're getting past the
Give
point.
someone else a go.
Yeah, so I think, and certainly not discouraging taking talented players. Definitely got to take that. You can't win with just a bunch of tough nuts. You got to have some skill and some athleticism and other things. But when you're looking at those different points of difference, like who wins, I think is an interesting thing to keep an eye on as well.
My question would be, and Reece sort of touched on it, how often when we're going through trials, do coaches have an eye for, hey, this kid might be a little bit off the mark at the first couple of trials due to nerves, due to whatever it is, teammates not seeing the ball? How often do we sit down and consider the development side of it? Hey, this kid may not be for now, but if we give her or him a chance, whether it's at 12s all the way through to youthies, that you can see something in them. You just know that you're going to have a hard time getting them over the line because their first initial trials were not standouts or didn't really impress. It's probably especially when you've got a coaching group that is selecting. So if anyone's got any thoughts on that, I know, Reece, you just touched on the bigs, and we don't pick them because they may not be there, or but I think it's a good thought to keep in the back of mind.
Yeah, I mean, my experience as a DOC, director of coaching, would always be, it's a hard one because I guess my experience, it kind of sounds arrogant, was always greater than most of the coaches involved in the process. But you want them to own the decisions because it's their team and things like that. But, you know, what I might see in a kid for longer term might be different to what they're seeing in the here and now. And they've got to coach them for the next 12 months. But I'm looking at, well, what could that kid be in 5 years when he's trying out for, you know, Big V and hopefully playing for our men's or women's team. So that was always a bit of a struggle. But I know Peter Lonergan used to always talk about, 9-1, or 8-2 is a rule, depending on how hard you want to push it. You know, so 8 or 9 selections for the coach, and we'd probably mostly agree on the 6 or 7 anyway, and then 1 or 2 for the program, depending on, you know, what it is. So it might be, no, we need you to take this big kid for the longer term development of the program, or we need you to take this athletic kid that's raw and just come from another sport or whatever, but isn't there yet, because they're going to be a player. We're seeing this, and this, and trying to have that conversation. I think that would be my suggestion from my experience. But Tim, I'm sure you've got far more wise words than me.
Mate. Thanks, Al. Thanks for the question. Hope you're well, mate.
Thank you.
I think that bringing them along, having an eye for who's like, it kind of goes against the first point I made about having nervous players who have a bit of belief is really important. But you're right and that's that thing about putting them with a group that they can work with, you know, like making sure that if you've got this kid who's not getting the ball or is with the team, if he's a big and the guards that he's got can't play, or if she's a good guard, but no one can get her the ball or whatever, there's no one else to go with her, then you got to try and put them in a situation where they can be successful. And then you might see them blossom. Yeah. I think that's part of the art of the trials and saying, well, let's just get this kid off this court, bring him over here for a few minutes. You know, some coach says, you know, I like this kid, you know, let's get them over here and put them with that group. And that's like staying alert during the session, you know, really listening. So one of the things and this is true for practice sessions, I think as well, is, you know, that moment when coaches come back in between drills and we kind of all stand around the score table and, you know, the kids get a drink or whatever. It's a good moment. One thing we used to do with the EMUs groups, we used to have a captain's log at the score table. And so anything that you wanted to observe at any time during the practice session you wrote it down, you know. So, you know, number 7 in the white singlet, that kid, that number, you know, great box out. You know, there's something that person does, and you jot it down on the log. And then we used to look at that after practice, and that was a practice thing. But I think that sort of thing, especially if you're running with a group, then you might find that little moment and you say, oh, I think this kid's a bit nervous, but they're showing some good signs. So someone writes that, and later at the meeting, like you say, Al, someone can bring that up and go, yeah, you're right, and it's a way of us not missing things, because we have so many thoughts that just roll around, but writing it down, it helps with your post-practice meeting. It helps with that evaluation. That was always a really good thing when we were coaching at groups with state teams or, rep teams, when you got a few coaches in the session, the captain's log, as it were.
Thanks, boys. That was excellent. I love the movement in between the lines, especially down here. We do tend to stand back and try and oversee everything, but great points, and the captain's log. I love it, Tim. Excellent. Thank you.
Al. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, boys.
Tim, I guess one, and I jotted this down when you were talking before. Sorry, Jared, taking over your Zoom. I wanted to ask, how do you decipher or understand an athlete's motivational desire? So you spoke about, do they like playing basketball? Do they want to get better, stuff like that? How have you assessed that stuff? Because it's obviously a key thing. How bad does the athlete actually want it? Because if they're really hungry and got the attributes, it can be a good mix. Whereas sometimes there's kids that kind of do it because it's what they've always done. They've made a state team before, so they play basketball because they've been all right at it, but it's all they've done. How do you sort of assess that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one here. I'll be interested in what other coaches think as well. It's one of those things, it's almost written in them. When they come out to shoot, when they walk in, the way they lace their boots up, the way they interact with their friends, the way, even if they're a loner, you know what I mean? Even if they're an introvert, and often some of the really good players are introverted players, like really good shooters or whatever, they really deep focus on their skill, but they disappear into the game. It's almost like the game swallows them up. They don't operate on the edge of the game. They're not around the peripheral. Does that make sense? It's almost like that when they're there, they become the basketball stadium is a comfortable place for them, and something about it, they're here, and and they look comfortable, and they're ballers. That's them, and you kind of got this sense that it's not about something else, if it's about clothing, or they just like hanging around basketball players, or they like the idea of them being a player, or their parents want it. But I don't know. That might be just sound a bit too misty, but that sort of answer. But it seems to me there's something about them, and I can think of so many players that I think, I'm not sure they really dig it or like it. And then there's these other people you think they're a lifer. They're lifers. They're basketball people.
Well, and they're going to have, if they want to stay in the game and play until they're 35, 36, like these pro guys do, and girls, you're going to have to embrace doing the same thing over and over. Like, you're going to do shell drill, you're going to do ball handling.
Yeah.
Do 5-on-0 offense.
They kind of got to like it, you know what I mean? They're like, they just disappear in it. They're not fighting it all the time.
Yeah.
They're not fighting the drill and the games. They're not, and they relish it in some way.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about, everyone becoming pro players. We're talking about just that question about who's that longevity as players, and you think this one, they're there, they're into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.